Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo has not shied away one bit from referencing the original series while also carving out its own identity. Thematic parallels and certain characters being mirrors of each other is nothing new in the world of JJK, and Modulo effectively continues that trend. Things like Dura and Dabura clearly being a play on Gojo and Sukuna. Dabura himself kind of has some similarities to Megumi when you look at his demeanor, his motivations being saving his sister, and the fact that he was forced to kill Dura. Even the concept of twins being a bad omen and other aspects of the power system seem to be entirely flipped on its head when it comes to the Simurians. So in this video, I want to talk about what might be the next battle of the strongest. That is, if Modulo even has such a thing, considering it's supposed to run for just 3 volumes. But let's get into how I think this big clash could take shape even after recent developments with Yuka, and why I don't think it would feature Yuji. At least not at first. The way that the world of Jujutsu Kaisen has aged over the last 68 years since the end of the series perfectly establishes why someone like Dabura would be mentioned in the same breath as the one and only Ryomen Sukuna, rather than say Gojo or any of his pupils. In terms of strength as it relates to the gap between him and the current average sorcerer, it couldn't make more sense. Yet the narrative subverted people's early expectations entirely. Among many things, the 2-chapter backstory of the Simurians shows how different Dabura is from Sukuna. And even though he's definitely ruthless, I still don't think he's the big bad he was painted to be at first. Meanwhile, who the actual villain of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo could really be starts to be a little more clear. With Mahito potentially taking on that role, it only makes sense to have Yuji back for their rematch. But then where does Dabura fit in? The way his presence was originally established, followed by how he's then characterized and his goal of lifting the curse off his sister, should indicate in theory that he'll be a big player in the narrative who clearly has something to fight for. And I don't think the anticipated battle against Yuka will be what it's being set up to be. Although the story behind a clash between Dabura and Mahito would obviously be very different to that of Gojo versus Sukuna, I can see a scenario that lays out their duel as the next battle of the strongest in a way that is consistent with how Modulo has called back to and expanded on certain ideas of the original series. The Simurians having a third eye, them not leaking Rolaluka the way humans leak cursed energy, and even the Kallians, the closest things they have to cursed spirits, seemingly being purer, more enlightened beings, all but spells out evolution once again being an underlying theme within the narrative. So the way things are headed, the Simurian situation looks like will be ripe for Mahito to exploit. If Mahito's able to reincarnate, hypothetically speaking, could his makeup and composition be altered if he's exposed to the Muru stones? Could that exposure to a source of a refined and optimized type of cursed energy trigger his evolution and transform him into a sort of cursed Kallian, unlike anything the Simurians have ever seen? Cause see, now that could be a worthy matchup for Dabura. Remember, he isn't Rumelian, so he doesn't really look up to the Kallians like the rest of his comrades. I don't believe he'll buy into it if Mahito were to be revered as a sort of deity by the other Rumelians. In fact, I think that's where he would notice that cursed spirits are not Kallians, and can indeed be a threat to Simurians as well. It could be that Mahito offers to remove his sister's curse in return for his support. But again, I can see Dabura being a voice of reason and standing with those who insist on coexistence, knowing that Mahito is up to no good. After all, Dabura made a promise to Dura, and I think he'll trust in Jujutsu sorcerers being able to guarantee his sister's well-being. This would mean Dabura undergoing some real character development that sees him wanting to make up for his mistakes for nearly taking on Yuka and triggering a war. When Yuji shows up, he'll of course want to take on Mahito himself. But if he's to be used as a trump card, then he can't be the first to jump in. Mahito, who's from an older generation transcending as a curse even if by different means, wouldn't be too different from how Sukuna evolved into the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in history. And so a showdown in the inhuman Makio that is now Tokyo starts to sound all too familiar. This, I think, would be the framework for a battle between the strongest Simurian of today and the strongest cursed spirit in history. Doesn't exactly have the same ring to it, right? But just like Akutami already subverted our expectations with Dabura not being some Sukuna 2.0, I suspect he'd take that further and paint him as more of a Gojo-like figure in this scenario. I know he already did that with Dura, but I mean specifically in terms of the expectations placed on him. And cook me if you want, but this would also be a reference to the parallels with Megumi. Dabura, who's mainly driven by very personal motivations, feels forced to step up and live up to expectations because he made a promise to someone who cared for him. This is also why I can't really see Yuji and Dabura being the ones to go at each other. Sure, they might clash in some sort of misunderstanding, but I don't know, I feel like those two are more likely to hit it off and remind each other of those they looked up to. And if they were to argue on who takes on Mahito first, it's exactly why I see Yuji ultimately allowing Dabura to fulfill his role as a warrior. Keep in mind, even Tsurugi recognized that the ways of the Simurians are similar to that of Japan's current Reiwa era, the age of the Jujutsu sorcerers we know. And there are other reasons that pertain more to Yuji's character why I see this being the case, but I'll get into that towards the end of the video. Back to Mahito, I believe setting him up as the final villain this way is one of the many avenues that could give Akutami the space to explore a totally cracked, full potential Mahito that is a realized version of what was hinted he could be capable of down the line. Even among the fanbase, I think most would agree that had he not been stopped in his tracks, Mahito was on his way to becoming the closest thing to a legitimate Sukuna 2.0, but with the nature and instincts of a true curse. And if an evolved idol transfiguration allows him to manipulate the souls of Simurians, then he has around 50,000 of them he might want to get his hands on. Some who might even give themselves up willingly, believing they should sacrifice their lives for the sake of what they could view as a god. This is something Mahito would most definitely take advantage of to try to rattle Dabura, who would then also have to be wary of he himself not getting transfigured. Even though at the time of recording we still don't know Dabura's curse technique or what exactly is in his power set, one thing that's pretty clear is that he has an insane pool of Rolaluka. And looking at what Maru did against the old curse user when his third eye took over, I wouldn't be surprised if that's just their basic manipulation of Rolaluka, meaning it's something Dabura might be able to do at will without even activating his curse technique. Maybe I'm wrong and what we saw then was specifically an extension of Maru's harmony technique. But that's not really what it looked like to me personally. Considering the tribes in Simuria valued strength the same way clans of sorcerers do in Japan, I wouldn't be surprised if Dabura has one of, if not the best curse technique a Simurian could have, like how the limitless and 10 shadows are viewed by the world of Jujutsu. Gojo and Sukuna's fight showcased a clash between a simple, ancient curse technique and a modern, very complex one. This time around, I think this showdown would feature a CT that reflects the absolute worst of humanity, against one that is regarded as the pinnacle of strength in Simuria. It's pretty much impossible to imagine what the Simurian equivalent of Limitless would look like, since it likely operates outside our laws of nature and above any human comprehension. Now, how would this battle play out? I think I've gone through the components that ultimately serve to set the stage for the latest Inhuman clash. Like I brought up at the top of the video, a reincarnated Mahito will for sure seek out Yuji, and I definitely wouldn't put it past him to make a whole scene, killing and destroying everything in sight, as he calls out to his old foe, attempting to draw him out. And instead of Yuji pulling up, it's Dabura, with that unimpressed stare and awe. I can't help but wonder who Dabura would remind Mahito of in that scenario. Sukuna, Gojo, or shit, maybe even Yuji. Either way, I see Mahito really being thrilled by such a challenge, viewing it as the perfect opportunity to cement himself as an unrivaled calamity. And just like Sukuna taunted Gojo by telling him that he was nothing more than a livelier fish on his cutting board, Mahito can do something similar and tell Dabura that he's merely an appetizer before his main dish. And before you know it, those two monsters just go at it. It's here where I think it would be a great opportunity for Akutami to fully flesh out the power system of Rolaluka, and how exactly it differs from cursed energy on a fundamental level. Exploring and expanding on the possibilities of cursed energy during fights with some of the highest stakes is something we saw a lot of in Jujutsu Kaisen, and one of the many reasons those fights are as memorable as they are. And even though Modulo is a very different story that hasn't really focused on fighting so far, I would love for there to be at least one huge fight that just takes us back. Some crazy hand-to-hand, unique usage of abilities, creative choreography, and meaningful dialogue to elevate all of that. I would expect Dabura and Mahito to have entirely different styles, strengths, and approaches to the battle. I think Mahito would probably lean on his CT a lot more and try to overwhelm Dabura with transfigured humans, Simurians, or whatever he can get his hands on or come up with, and in the process, pushing the bounds of his own potential, experimenting with his capabilities and growing as a curse. Whereas I would expect Dabura to be a lot more calculated and tactical with his attacks, using his curse technique as an extension of his abilities as a warrior. Of course, that's mostly speculation without a whole lot to base it off of, but I think it would be in line with what we've seen from him so far. And I say he puts hands on Mahito for most of their fight, but I can imagine Dabura just not being able to put him down. And the longer the fight drags on, Mahito only gets stronger as he welcomes the chaos and waits for his opportunity. Until eventually, he sees an opening and finally catches Dabura. And just like that, there's a new king of curses. And like the one of old, it would take a concerted effort to bring him down. Or as we know it, some good old Jujutsu jumping. And who better to lead the charge than the guy who wrote the book on Jump Kaisen, Yuji Itadori. This ain't Kashimo pulling up. Yuji going in after Dabura alongside Maru, Tsurugi, and Yuka is how they get the job done. His whole thing has always been fighting alongside his peers and bringing them together. Gojo can never fight side to side with his students, but that's not Yuji. So I think it's only appropriate that he lead and fights next to the young generation of sorcerers like his sensei trusted he would do. Even though Dabura would lose this battle of the strongest against Mahito, it's Yuji who would once again be the last man standing when it's all said and done, stopping the world's biggest threat for a second time. That's how I envision Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo's Battle of the Strongest and the subsequent showdown at the moment. Keep in mind that this is of course only a theory based on my interpretation of the story so far, and that things could change really fast. Regardless, I thought this was a fun idea to play around with, and I hope you feel the same way. Let me know your thoughts on Dabura and Mahito and a potential clash between them down below. Do you think Modulo will even have anything like Gojo vs Sukuna? Even if it does, I can't imagine it would run for more than like 5 chapters. But that's just me. Who knows, maybe Modulo gets extended. Anyway, thank you for reaching the end of the video. Like always, I really appreciate you sticking around. Much love and take care. Peace.